Hi and welcome to video number 21. This video I'll be looking at making an exhaust gas temperature gauge, but this time a sliding gauge, so it works just the same as the one on the screen on the MFD. On the previous video I made a text gauge, so you could just see the text, see the actual temperature, but it didn't have the sliding element. So this video follows on exactly where part 20 left off, and if you haven't seen part 20 you really should, because in what I'm doing here will make much more sense, but we'll give it a go from here. So this is where we left it. I had my flight simulator up and I had a close-up view of the three text gauges that I made, one for the exhaust gas temperature, one for the throttle and one for the mixture, and I was showing how they act together, how the exhaust gas temperature changes as you raise the throttle and how you change the mix, and explain the relationship between them. We also established that this gauge here doesn't become live until the exhaust gas temperature gets to 670 degrees. Then each gradation is another 30 degrees on, so that's 670, 700, 730, 760, etc. So that's a calculation we need to do to make that work accurately. So that's what I want to do. What I think would be useful would be to have a closer look at the structure of the slider gauge and what we're actually going to have to make. So it's made of a number of layers, and the bottom layer is a solid background, so you can choose your background color here. Depends on what you do for the user background, which is the next layer, whether you can see through that or not. I'm going to do that. I'm going to draw a PNG graphic with a transparency so that I can see through my graphic into the solid background, but you could draw a solid background. It would be fine. So the next layer is this user designed background, and this is what I need to draw. This is a screenshot of that gauge, and I need to draw this grid system here with that being in the exact center, and then I've got 4 gradations on each side. It doesn't include this triangle. The triangle is going to be the sliding element that we'll deal with in a bit, but that's what I'm going to draw and then upload. In fact, I have already drawn it. I'm not going to show you how to draw that. The next layer is an optional one where you can put the text variable back on. So if you want to see the actual temperature as well as have a gauge showing it, you can actually put the exact temperature on there. And that's exactly as it was on the text gauge, that there's a variable for it to read and it'll put that text on there. You have the ability, if you need to offset it, to add or subtract from the number and to multiply it and divide it, but there's no need to for this one. It'll just show you the temperature in degrees Celsius, unless you wanted it converted to Fahrenheit, and you could do some work here with the figures. You could control the number of decimals and leading zeros, but there's no need to with this one. And this determines the position that the text variable will appear, and the font and size and the colour. So that's all as before. The next layer is the interesting one. That's the slider variable. That's the little triangle that's going to slide across the screen, and we need to control that again by reading a variable and then doing some multiplication. This one here will tell us how far across the x-axis it should move for every 1 degree rise in our reading here. So if we, at the moment, if we raise it by 1 degree, it'll move across 1 pixel, and we need to do a calculation to make that work. If you want your slider to move up and down, you use the X multiplier and it slides up and down rather than left and right, but it can only move in one direction at a time. Then we have the X offset and Y offset, and that's where the arrow should appear and start, and call it its 0 point. It will start bang in the middle, and so we give it an X offset to move it across and a Y offset to move it down, and tell it that's the new start position, and then it will work its way across from there using the X multiplier. So that's where we upload that. Again, it's a PNG with a transparency, so we can see through all this, through to our user background and through to the solid background as well. And we upload the slider here. And the last layer that we need is, or we don't need for this one, but the last one available to us is the mask. We don't need a mask for this one, but masks can be useful. I've seen it used for making rotary gauges, and you have an arrow and you want to mask part of the arrow. You don't want to see where the pivot is, or you want it to appear to be underneath a scale, so it's looking like it's underneath it and there's a layer on top. So again, a mask with the transparency going through so we can see through to everything will be useful, but we don't need one for this. But that's where you would upload it there. And the last bit that we're going to do is put a title across the top so that we know that we're looking at the exhaust gas temperature gauge, and that has the usual drop down for text, for fonts, for colours and that kind of stuff. So let's have a look at what we need to draw. We need to do some calculations to get the drawings correct. So that's what I'm trying to draw, not the triangle, just the grid here. We'll talk about the grid. The button on the Stream Deck works either as a 72 or 144 pixel, and I'm going to work on 144 pixels across and down. So 72 will be our center point, and we said we need this to fall in the center. So I did some calculations and did some tests, and this is the one I've come up with. If we start the first line 12 pixels across and then draw a line every 15 pixels across, we end up with these locations: 12, 27, 42, 57, and there's 72 are dead middle, and so on upwards. So they're the figures that were calculated, starting at 12 and going up 15 each time. And what that gives us for the temperatures, remember I said this one starts at 670, and there's 700, 730, 760, etc. So they're the exact temperatures, but we're not really interested in that when we're calculating how the slider is going to move. The slider, we want to start with a value of 0, and this would be the offset, how far from 0 it is. So it'll be 30, 60, 90, etc. That's the offset from 0, because that's how I do the multiplication. To make sure that it's moved the right number of pixels, I need to know how far it's got to go from 0 upwards, and there'll be a script involved to show you how that works. But this makes our calculation nice and easy, that we've got to move 30 degrees from here to here in the space of 15 pixels. So our multiplier is 1 degree is half a pixel, and so that's the value that we're going to use when we come to put our multiplier in. So let's show you how it actually works. Let's bring the flight simulator up, and we'll have our Stream Deck software. So this exhaust gas temperature here, that's going to go, and we're going to use a slider. So in all these X's and O's, it's going to be a slider gauge that we need to use, and yes, we're going to replace that. So let's put the title in. Exhaust gas temperature. I'm not going to do this variable here. That's the variable we'll need to control the position of the slider, but we'll do that later, because I actually need to write the script in here to make it work properly. We did calculate that the multiplier was 0.5, so we can put that in straight away, and we'll talk about the offset in a little while. I'm going to put my text variable in so I can actually see live numbers while I'm working. So I'll get those from X's and O's. So we bring X's and O's over. What I really need to do is use a script editor for that, and that will let us gather the variable that we want. So if we do a search here for my exhaust, apply that filter. I want this variable here, so right hand click, and I need that dropped in here, and we tell it we're looking at engine number 1. There is only one engine, but we need to tell it engine 1, and just need to check that, put it in the right place. It's in the text variable. That's one of the little foibles here, that it does slide across and you can lose some of the text. And if I click submit, I should have my temperature there, and that should be live. So that's working fine. Okay, so that's in position now. Let's upload the background. So if I click on upload background, I've drawn it twice. I've drawn it once in red so that you can see it clearly, and it's also in white here, but it doesn't come up quite so clearly on the preview because it shows the transparency as white as well, but that's the one that I want. So we can upload our background and I'll submit that, and there we have the grating at the bottom. And I'll upload the sliding element, which is my pointer. Same again, it's drawn in white with a transparency, so we can drop that in, and it'll appear sort of in the middle of this number 3 here. You won't be able to see it, but it is there. Perhaps you can just see the dot, but that's where I need to apply the offset to it. So it's the offset on the sliding variable here to put it into the right position. So this offset here, X offset, I did some calculations and it's 60. I'll submit that so you can see the pointer move across. So we need to move it across 60 pixels. And there it is, lined up, so it's ready to drop onto there. And if we put the Y offset in now, the Y offset, we need to bring that down by 40, so there'll be minus 40 to bring that down from where it is. So that's now in position here. So we're getting somewhere. What we need to do now is to work on the script that we need to get this to move across in the correct amount. Everything else is pretty well in place. Okay, so let's have a look at the script that we need to build so we can calculate the movement for the slider. We need to know obviously the exhaust gas temperature for engine number 1, and I want to make sure that it's above 670. The gauge doesn't move until it's above 670, so we put in the 670. So this is the RPM, the reverse Polish notation in action. There are 2 values, and I want you to compare these 2 values. So the comparison is it less than? So if this is less than 670, I'm not interested. I just need you to send me a 0. So whatever happens up below 670, send me a 0, and so the pointer stays in its 0 position. But if it's above 670, there's the else without the E in it. Give me the exhaust gas temperature, but take 670 off of it, because I don't need to know the temperature, I need to know how far above the threshold it is. So when it's at 670, it will still send a 0. If it's at 680, it will send 10. If it's at 690, it will send 20. So that's calculating the offset for me. So that's the script I need to build, and I need to build that into this section here, the variable. And I'll build that script in X's and O's. So let's get rid of that one, and we'll build the script again. Okay, so insert the variable thereafter, and it is the exhaust gas temperature. So we can put that in, and we can index that up as number 1. I want to compare it to 670 and find out if it's less than, and if it is, I want you to send me a 0. If it's above 670, so this is the else, note the strange spelling of else, I want you to get me that variable. So I can actually copy it from here and paste it into here. You'll notice that it missed the bracket off the end, so we put the bracket in and we subtract 670 from it. And this is the complete version down here, so just check it out, that we've got the exhaust gas temperature for number 1, compare it to 670, if it's less than, send a 0, else check number 1 and subtract 670 from it and send it to me. So we can copy that and we can paste that into here. It's a script, so we have to say not a variable you're looking for, it's a script, and we'll submit that, and then we can go and test that. So if we bring back the flight simulator, and I'll also bring back the close-up view of the gauge, as I move the throttle up you should see the temperature rise, and if I've got my script correct, you should see when we get to 670 we should see things moving. Always a tense moment when you've written a script as complex as that. And there it is moving. And when it gets here it should be about 700, and then it should go to 730 when we get to the next gradation. And that seems to be working well, and it seems to be matching what's going on the gauge over here. So the gauge and that match quite well, and we can see the exact temperature. So that's a sliding gauge made. I hope that made sense. Any questions, put them in the comments and I'll get back to you and see if this works for you. Okay, I've no idea really what I'm going to do for the next one. I'll try to sort out another gauge. Perhaps I'll have a go at doing the RPM gauge and see how that works. I have to say my graphic skills aren't that great, so I'm not making any promises. But I'll see you in the next one, whatever it is.